මගේ නම අඤ්ඤා කොණ්ඩඤ්ඤගේ පඤ්ඤා දාස. අඤ්ඤා කොණ්ඩඤ්ඤගේ පඤ්ඤා දාස. පජිමේ ෆෝන් කරලා තියෙන්නේ මෙන්න. ඔව් ඉතින් බලන්න එපා. ඒ ඒක ජනාධිපති වුණොත් නේ. ජනාධිපති වුණාම ගානට කතා කරන්න. පජිමේ කනසූත් කරමින් බා. ඉන්දුවත් රන්නන් පාටයි සමුනද. ඔයාගේ ෆෝන් එකේ මොකේ මයික් එකේ මට ඇහෙන්නේ මෙහි එක්කවත් ඇහෙන්නේ නෑ නෑ මම පජිම කතා කරන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒක එහෙම තමයි පොඩි ඩිලේ එකක් තියෙන්නේ. YouTube live stream වල ගැටියක් තියෙනවා. ඕ නෑනේ. උඹට එන්න බා. උඹට ගෑවෙන්න බා කිව්වනේ උඹ ගෑවිලා. දැන් නෑ. නෑ. ඒක ඕෆ් කරලා ගියා. නෑ වැඩක්. අන්න දැන් ආවා. ගියා. නෑ ඒක ඉතින් සේව් කරොත් නේ ඉතින් සේව් කරන්න එපා. අම්බේ සංසාරේ. ඒක වල කැමරා හතරම තියෙනවා. හතර. 4 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4. 4.
remain a little bit cautious over this phase one trade deal. You can actually see the options implied 1 year volatility on the offshore yuan remaining above those levels that we saw in April and July when the market saw the deal as more imminent. Options implied 1 year volatility on Friday at 5.05%, while it was at 4.5% in April and July. But as our Bloomberg opinion columnist John Authers puts it, the fact that the on and offshore currencies are back below 7 to the dollar is a clear sign of peace from China.
The trade deal phase one is in place. Details we await to see. Now, China, we understand, are going to buy up to $50 billion worth of farm products. Some would say it's a little bit of a tall order. What do the Chinese have to say?
Yeah, that's right. And that's whole part of the deal that we don't know yet. The devil is in the details of this phase one trade agreement. We've yet to hear from China to confirm this $50 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products that President Donald Trump says would be coming pretty soon. That's one of the details missing on top of President Xi's and President Trump's signatures. And what I'm looking at this morning is already the damage that's been done. These are exports as a whole, and you can already see there's been permanent damage. And when it comes to soybeans alone, a lot of reports are saying it could take 6 to 7 years to make up for the loss that the trade war has put. So agricultural products are going to be really one to watch what China comes out and says, because it's going to be a huge reprieve for American farmers and American heartland.
Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern in London, Juliet Sarli in Singapore, and Bloomberg Quint's Niraj Shah for us in Mumbai. Let's get to the first word news now with Annabelle Drewlers in Hong Kong. Hi, Annabelle.
Hi, Nara. Well, Boris Johnson will appoint new ministers to his cabinet today, following his landslide victory in last week's UK election. The Prime Minister will name his senior team as he welcomes 109 new Conservative members of Parliament to London to take their seats in the House of Commons. Downing Street says the government will introduce a law to deliver Brexit before Christmas, paving the way for the EU divorce to take place by the end of January. China's welcomed the signing of the phase one trade deal with the US by pledging to suspend additional tariffs on certain imports from America. The Ministry of Finance says it'll also refrain from imposing duties on vehicles and auto parts shipped from the US. There'll also be a continued suspension of tariffs on a combined $126 billion worth of American imports. The international effort to rein in fossil fuel pollution has stumbled after UN talks watered down language agreed to in previous years. Delegates left Madrid's COP25 meeting after more than 2 weeks of discussions, agreeing only on the urgent need for deeper cuts to greenhouse gases. They shelved work on market mechanisms as a tool for countries to meet their goals, and also for agree of finance needed to fix them. China's industrial production and retail sales both in November. Factory output rose more than 6% from a year earlier, surging past expectations for 5% growth. Retail sales, meanwhile, expanded by 8%. However, separate data showed that investment is still slowing. It's expanding at its slowest pace since 1998. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has reiterated Beijing's firm support for Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam. The remarks came as Li hosted Lam for her annual duty visit to the capital. Meanwhile, another weekend of protests saw roads blocked in the commercial area Mong Kok, with demonstrators throwing glass bottles and other items at police. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Manus?
Annabelle, thank you very much. Annabelle Drewlers in Hong Kong. Now, Christine Lagarde's era at the ECB has begun with an assured performance at her debut press conference on Thursday. She showcased her initiative for a year-long review of monetary policy and expressed hope for the economy to stabilize. Its meeting review, RBC Capital Markets, labelled Lagarde as neither a dove nor a hawk, but an owl. Speaking ahead of the weekend, Governing Council member Francois Villeroy said the euro area was stabilizing. He said, quote, "There is the beginning of an economic stabilization, and we've stopped revising down our growth and inflation forecasts." Peter Shafiq from RBC Capital Markets is still with us. So a couple of big themes here, Peter, to deal with. First of all, let's deal with your ECB-ometer. An owl. Describe an owl to me, and what is your take in terms of Madame Lagarde's ability to fly like a dove?
First of all, obviously, the owl was not our doing. That was her words, not ours. We just borrowed them. But going back to the substance, indeed, she delivered an assured performance. And when you look at, you referenced our ECB-ometer, which is our new index that we've created to measure the hawkishness or the dovishness of any central bank, really. And what it shows very clearly is that she has sort of stayed the course of her predecessors so far. There's no indication that we can make out that the ECB is going to firm up policy anytime soon, really. And I think the biggest focus for next year, particularly for the first half of the year, is going to be on the review rather than monetary policy in its own right.
Does that mean that we could get no action at all in 2020 as opposed to a rate cut that some are still expecting?
Well, first of all, I think the rate cut is completely out of the question unless the economy magically collapses. So that is not going to happen. And therefore, I think if you look at it, they have put their policies in place, which they will try to see through. I think for a very long period of time now, we will get no concrete action from the ECB. Whether or not that's entirely true for the entire year remains to be seen, because I reckon towards the end of the year they will have to make a decision what to do with their QE program when they get to their limits. So that's more mechanical. But I think at least for the first 6 months, I really don't think there's any chance of any policy action, concrete policy action.
Okay, so given your a la carte menu of a lot of introspection, a lot of sitting still, I've seen the travel on the bund yield from what, negative 0.6, beyond negative 0.6 to negative a quarter. We're going to get the PMIs. Citigroup Surprise Index is the highest in 1.5 years. You got a phase one trade deal. What does that do? Do I get back to zero on bunds?
That's certainly our call. We do think there's a very decent chance of that. But as I was saying earlier on the question as regards the trade deal, for me this is a process. It's not sort of a big bang moment. So I expect, or we expect, that the data will stabilize. And if I may say, if we have the global economy stabilizing, that's important. It's very, very important for us here in Europe, because obviously we're very open economies. So, and if that sort of transpires then into better data in the European economies, then I think in Q1, maybe Q2, we have a very good chance of getting back to zero.
How much of a lift could that give to the euro, which got to a 4-month high at the end of last week, both on the UK election news and the phase one expectations? Could we go much higher? It's been asleep for a while now.
It has, and frankly, we think it will probably stay half asleep for quite a while, because again, you know, it's we've got these sort of opposing forces on both sides, but generally speaking, if we have a little bit more inflows into the European markets, both equity and other assets, that should help the euro to some degree. But again, you know, if you look at it against the pound, has its own story, the dollar has its own story. So particularly against the big currencies, I think it's very difficult to see a massive appreciation.
Tell me this, one of the things that you focused on, Peter, was Christine Lagarde's reference to the TLTROs. Now, there's the lack of take-up on those. Is this the ballast to no movement in policy? Is TLTROs, is open-ended QE, a sufficient ballast for the growth story in Europe with no movement on rates?
Well, yes and no, of course, particularly as far as the TLTROs are concerned. There are quite a lot of uncertainties, because what we do know is towards the middle of the year, quite a lot rolls off. And that is, of course, one of the key things that drives the ECB's balance sheet, that drives the liquidity in the market and all the rest of it. And if the take-up of the TLTROs remains relatively low, whilst the repayments, once they are quite plentiful, then you might have sort of a bit of a wobble here. But overall, with the ECB's balance sheet in expansion mode, I do think that this is not going to be a big story.
Peter Shafrick from RBC Capital Markets stays with us. Now, coming up, repo stress. We'll be looking at what today's activity could mean for year-end funding next. This is Bloomberg.
Every Wednesday, Bloomberg Equality will feature forward-looking conversations with influential business leaders about empowering women to achieve their professional potential. Bloomberg Live's senior APEC editor Malika Kapoor.
One of the first things you did was to advocate for more women on company boards. Where does that stand now?
In January, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange implemented a change to the listing rules that mandates that all listed companies have a board diversity policy.
It's really about investing in that next generation, widening the funnel of talent, of women coming into the industry, but not neglecting that middle rung, because we need to provide relatable support for those women.
Are you at all optimistic?
I am, in fact, optimistic. In general, people in Hong Kong are beginning to understand what equality and freedom to marry means for the minority of the population.
Women make up nearly half the global workforce. But the higher the position, the fewer women you'll see. Like in finance, where just 15% of executive management is female. That's not good enough. So at Standard Chartered, we'll have women in at least 30% of our senior roles by 2020. And we're just getting started. Because we're not here for good enough. We are Standard Chartered, and we are here for good.
Hey, it's Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Manus Cranny in Dubai.
And I'm Naira Chehich in London. Let's get the Bloomberg Business Flash with Annabelle Jewelers in Hong Kong. Hi, Annabelle.
Hi, Naira. Well, International Flavors and Fragrances has reached agreement to buy DuPont's nutrition division. The $26.2 billion deal sees the US company beat Ireland's Kerry Group as it seeks to expand into the fast-growing food ingredients business. The unit specializes in products such as sweeteners and emulsifiers and has seen growth in areas such as plant-based meats and probiotics. China's ambassador to Germany has threatened retaliation if it blocks Huawei as a supplier of 5G wireless equipment. Speaking at an event on Saturday, Ambassador Wu Ken said there will be consequences if Berlin makes a decision. Wu also made reference to the millions of vehicles German car makers sell in China. English football club Arsenal's facing a backlash from China after one of its top players attacked the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. State-run CCTV pulled Arsenal's game from screens yesterday, despite the club's immediate attempt to distance itself from star player Mesut Ozil's remarks. Earlier this year, the NBA was slammed in China after an executive showed support for the democracy protests in Hong Kong. Boeing's considering temporarily halting production of the 737 MAX. That's as regulatory clearance for the grounded jet's return looks increasingly likely to slow in January 2020. Bloomberg understands Boeing executives believe a temporary pause would be less disruptive than a further slowdown in production. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Naira Manus.
Annabelle, thank you. I'll pick it up from here. Here's what you need to know for the trading day. It is all about the repo market. Money market participants will be watching the activity as a bellwether for potential year-end funding stresses and whether the Fed has really been effective in relieving that pressure. Danny Berger has been keeping an eye on the repo.
Manus, definitely today is going to be and other market players to get that short-term funding they need for their day-to-day operations. Not to mention it's December, year-end, we see seasonal illiquidity. But what's different this time is the Fed plans to inject $500 billion into the system by year-end. Today marks the start of a 32-day operation of $50 billion. So their hope is that it will relax some of the stresses that we've seen so far this year and that we tend to see in December. So that's going to be the question swirling around markets today. Has the Fed done enough to relieve those pressures?